Good afternoon. It's Monday, the 22nd of February, 2021, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. Your host today, Mike Robinson, myself, Brian Gerrish, and David Scott, bringing us northern exposure from north of the border. Many apologies for that small technical problem. It happens sometimes.
It does, and actually we've got a couple of technical problems today. We solved that one, but YouTube, I did notice just before we came on, didn't update the date and the graphic for the live stream, so it does still say the 19th of February, which is a real pain. Sometimes YouTube does this, so we do apologise for that. But look, let's get straight on then, because come in, we're open. Apparently Boris is going to be speaking at 3:30 this afternoon in Parliament to give a statement on the lifting of the lockdown. And it's going to be in a couple of stages, a number of stages. March the 8th, schools are going to open. There's going to be outdoor after-school sports and activities allowed. This is fantastic. Recreation in a public space, such as a park, that's going to be allowed, but only for 2 people. And then you're going to be allowed, though, to sit down for coffee or for a picnic, but only 2 people. And then, although schools are going to be opening for all pupils on the 8th of March, apparently, it's going to be the case that there's going to be a little bit of flexibility built into that to allow the schools to organise for testing of pupils. And then from the 29th of March, allegedly the rule of 6 comes back. Excellent. We're going to get the rule of 6 back. No tiers mentioned yet, though. No tiers. But the rule of 6 will be back, and outdoor sports facilities such as basketball courts and so on will be allowed to be used. Well, what's the reaction been? Steve Baker has been published an article in the Telegraph headlined, "We must believe in vaccines, restore our way of life and acknowledge the harms used by lockdowns." So he's saying that well, let's have a look at some of the points that he's making. He's absolutely bought into the vaccine narrative. He wants everybody to be getting their vaccines, but he's saying this week some in government have started talking about a different test for lifting these devastating lockdowns and restrictions, one of circulation or infection numbers. So he's already hearing in the background that there's going to be perhaps some pullback from this. And we'll come on to that a little bit more in a second. He goes on to say this: "We simply must have regard to harms caused by lockdowns and restrictions as well as the disease." Now, he said that in the context that vaccines are the way out of this, and so that has to be kept in mind. He said we cannot be said to be free of lockdowns and restrictions when at a moment's notice the government might shut down. And he went on then to list the types of things that the government might shut down. And David, I have to say, we're going to come on to this in a little bit more detail in a second, but one of the things that it struck me about what Steve Baker was saying was that really we're not going to be free of lockdowns until government starts behaving democratically again. And this is really one of the features that there's almost an acceptance that government has been operating outside its authority without the will of Parliament and so on, and that's okay.
Operating outside its authority, operating outside of anything its authority could ever be, because it's not just a matter of the will of Parliament. It's operating in a way which is unlawful. It's imposing restrictions on people which are unlawful. And the explanations given, oh, well, look at COVID. And when you look at the statistics, it's much the same as every other year. And you wonder where it is. And it's this mysterious thing that justifies endless infringements on our individual rights. And nobody, even the better people in Parliament who are speaking out against this, very few of them, if anybody, are saying, look, why is the government instructing us in this minute detail? Why does it not just leave us alone? Why does it not just let us make our own decisions about risks which are quite normal? And it seems to me that having surrendered all authority over every aspect of our life to the state is going to be very difficult to get it back again.
That is absolutely true. Now, let's go on with what Steve Baker was saying. He went on to say that's why we need the protection of a new Public Health Act. So this is the bit that really staggered me. He's calling for a new Public Health Act. Let's just have a look and see what he's actually calling for here. So first of all, to ensure that Parliament could vote in advance and often on lockdowns and restrictions, to ensure their proportionality is justified by ministers. So, David, he's actually calling for a new piece of legislation in order to guarantee that Parliament behaves in the way that it's behaved for hundreds of years. This is really quite an incredible, to my mind, an incredible position that he's taking here, that for normal democracy to work, we need a new Act of Parliament.
And also he's institutionalising in statute lockdowns and restrictions, something that would have been unthinkable until a year ago.
Yes, okay, well, let's go on with it then. He says, provide that legislation could be amended and debated in the usual way. So again, we need an Act of Parliament to provide that legislation can be amended and debated in the usual way. It's quite incredible. He goes on to say that require ministers to go through the process of cost-benefits analysis, quantifying the harms and benefits of their proposals. This is stuff which is supposed to happen anyway, and he's trying to justify creating a new Health Protection Act in order to make these things happen. And finally, it would recognise that experts are only human too, ending monopoly expert advice by introducing multidisciplinary teams and red team challenge. Well, perhaps that's the only one that I slightly agree with. But nonetheless, I don't know what you think, Brian, but this is, I just think this is an incredible position for a senior Tory MP to be taking.
I do not think that these proposals have come out of his own mind. I do not believe that Steve Baker was sitting in an armchair thinking about what was going on and thought this is what we need to do. I think these are seeded ideas that have been put in his head through the various committees, the research teams that are operating up in Westminster. These are seeded into his mind, and he's now trying to push these through. David, you mentioned operating outside authority, and my mind went straight to the political charity Common Purpose, talking about beyond authority. 20 years ago, we were warning that policies were being seeded into government by unaccountable bodies such as the charity Common Purpose. What I think we're looking at is those unaccountable policies now coming to the surface, but I don't think he's thinking it through, Mike.
Well, he's suggesting that our God-given inalienable rights can be removed as long as some bureaucrat does a cost-benefit analysis. I don't find that tremendously reassuring.
No. Well, look, as I say, Boris is going to be making a statement in Parliament at 3:30 this afternoon, apparently, roughly around that time, and the lockdown may be lifted. But there are caveats on this lifting of the lockdown. Let's just have a look at what has been published so far by the government. They're saying that the lockdown would be lifted only if the vaccine deployment programme continues successfully, only if evidence shows vaccines are sufficiently effective in reducing hospitalisation and deaths in those vaccinated. So it will come as no surprise to everybody that today the latest top headline on the BBC is that vaccines have been fantastically effective. They have reduced hospitalisations, they've reduced deaths. This is what the BBC is pushing out this morning, just in time for this press release from the government. It goes on to say, only if infection rates do not risk a surge in hospitalisations will we put unsustainable pressure on the NHS. We didn't have that at any point. Let's just remind ourselves, we didn't have that at any point, not since March. And finally, our assessment of the risks is not fundamentally changed by new variants of concern. Now, you'll note the capital V and the capital C on that. That isn't my typo, that is the way that they published it in their press release. So I'm putting a trademark sign on that because I find that very, very interesting, David. Variants of concern has become a brand with capital letters. What do you make of that?
Well, it's a means of extending the fear, isn't it? Right? We get to a point where everyone's either had it or been exposed to it, and how much of a threat can this be? Well, it has to change into something else, something new and strangely more threatening, even though it's very much like what we had before. And it simply extends the state power over every aspect of our lives indefinitely. Where does this actually end? I haven't heard anybody, Boris or anyone else, saying how we actually exit this completely and utterly.
David, it's going to end in the Magic Kingdom, and I'll help viewers with that description in a minute.
Yeah, okay. So, David, this is the Mail then, and they've got a headline here. Dominic Cummings wanted Boris Johnson to scrap the SAGE committee after raging at leaks by pro-lockdown scientists amid fears. Some of them were using their position to push for tougher restrictions. This is sort of harking back to what Steve Baker's just been talking about in some ways.
Well, I knew there was some reason we had a slightly soft spot for Dominic Cummings. He was complaining that the scientists were essentially taking over, that they were dictating policy, they had their own agenda. It wasn't in the interest of the country, and it was ignorant of the effects it had on the wider economy and on the wider nation. And he thought that the person who was called Prime Minister should actually be running the country and not the SAGE committee. And now he's no longer in post.
Indeed. Well, look, let's move on then to the latest flu news, because of course we've been talking about this for quite some time now. This is not the latest influenza COVID-19 surveillance report. There'll be a new one out tomorrow, I believe, or Wednesday. But we were making the point, if you remember, that if you look at the graphs, flu has more or less disappeared. Very, very low levels of flu in the UK. And in fact, globally, flu has disappeared completely according to the World Health Organization. It disappeared finally in week 16 or week 17 of 2020, and it hasn't been seen since. But our old friend, Professor John Edmonds, has been speaking out about this. Here he is. He has been saying, if I had to gamble on it, he's from SAGE, of course. He said, if I had to gamble on it, then I would guess we are likely to get a more severe flu epidemic in the coming winter, that's 2021, assuming restrictions are fully lifted by then. He went on to say, we have effectively missed out on flu this winter, so the levels of immunity are less than would be typical. And he was also suggesting that social distancing had something to contribute to that as well. And he said, in fact, it's not impossible that we will have an out-of-season epidemic, perhaps in the autumn rather than the winter. So SAGE is keeping all options open, David, to make sure that lockdown can be called in at any opportunity, at any point during the year. Now, personally, I think lockdown is being lifted temporarily, purely to get past the G7 and make sure that international travel and so on is possible for the G7, and also the COP conference, the climate conference was taking place in Glasgow. As soon as those two major international events are over, I think we're going to be straight back into this.
So just let me get that one straight. His position is that social distancing, mask wearing and the lockdown rules kill natural immunity and therefore generate further waves of disease, the reaction to which is going to be more social distancing, mask wearing and lockdown. That's his idea.
That certainly seems to be the position that he's arguing for, yes.
But he is a professor.
Is he a moron?
No. You might call him that, but he is the new breed of professor, that's now on the SAGE committee, and this is the man, or one of the men, that has been involved in setting this policy for the last 12 months. So let's just put him back on screen. This is one of the key people in the SAGE committee that has created this drive for and this pressure on the government to keep the lockdown in place.
David, if you look at the image on the screen carefully, you can see some of his drawings and scientific research pinned on the board behind him.
Now, look, we shouldn't. Yes, David, thoughts?
Oh no, I think I can't believe the fact that we as a nation are listening to these people. Right? This is not rational. Right? This is not rational behaviour. It achieves a certain end. It achieves control. It achieves a society that's locked down. It achieves authority in the hands of certain professors. It achieves authority in the hands of the state. But what does it actually do for the ordinary men and women of this country? Only harm, as far as I can see. Why are we listening? Why is anyone listening to this man?
These are good questions. Now, of course, one of the major areas of harm is economic harm. So let's have a look at, well, how do you pronounce her second name? It's Mariana Mazzucato, is that right?
I think we'll go with that. And apologies to the woman if we've in any way mangled her second name. Now, we've actually reported on Mariana before, because she's an advisor to the Scottish Government, and she has come up on the news a long time ago, but thanks to one of our viewers for pointing out just what she's been doing in the last few years. So she's working for the University College London Institute for Innovation and Public Purpose. Now, Brian, it's not common purpose, it's just very, very close. So the Institute for Innovation and Public Purpose is changing how public value is imagined, practiced and evaluated to tackle societal challenges. Does this language ring any bells with you, Brian?
Well, it's common purpose language with probably a 2021 spin on it, but I tell you, this is all leading to the Magic Kingdom.
Well, she's been very busy actually visiting the Magic Kingdom or Davos, which is more or less the same thing. So here she is at the World Economic Forum. She's joined global leaders in the World Economic Forum in Davos, providing expertise around globalization and competitiveness. Now, it's very good news for Scotland, of course, that she's also making policy impact north of the border. Here she is with her arm round Nicola Sturgeon, teaching Nicola Sturgeon how to think about the economics, and giving her a little pamphlet from the Institute for Innovation and Public Purpose. And the note here is the IIPP's work is dedicated to this ambition. We bring revived notions of public value and public purpose to the centre of political economy and to concrete policy practice. Our work equips leaders to co-design growth that is innovation-led, sustainable and inclusive. So Nicola Sturgeon's going to co-design Scotland's growth under this wise tutelage. So we should find out a little bit more about who's setting the policy, because remember, Nicola's a follower. She does what the advisors say. This is her advisor. And she's also advising the EU, and she's advising the Italian government, and she's advising the Norwegian government. She's advising many people. So she's very significant. So she's won lots of prizes, so that's good. She's the winner of international prizes, including the 2020 John von Neumann Award, the 2019 All European Academics Madame de Stael Prize for Cultural Values. She was also named one of the 3 most important thinkers about innovation by the New Republic, one of the 50 most creative people in business in 2020 by Fast Company, and one of the 25 leaders shaping the future of capitalism by Wired. And here's the thing I've got about that. She's not innovated anything. She's not led a company. She's not formed a company. She's not engaged in capitalism. She's not taken a risk. She's not been an entrepreneur. She's just written about it. She's not done any of these things. She's just theorised about it whilst being well funded. Well, shall we see where she's well funded from? Here's just a few of the research grants. This is just a smattering of what's on her CV. The Open Society Foundation, the BBC. She's actually managed to get money out of the BBC. You've got to give her some credit for that. We've also got the European Commission, the Institute for New Economic Thinking, the Ford Foundation. So the tax-exempt foundations are funding this person. She's doing the research. She's setting up institutions which are state-funded, and they're telling the politicians how to think about creating innovation and creating economic growth. So what do you think's the exemplar for this? Where do they look for inspiration? China. So here we talk about Schumpeter, the slightly Austrian economist. He was born in Austria. He was not Austrian exactly in terms of his outlook. He's far more big state than that, but he's very popular. So the institute which she has founded has issued a paper entitled Schumpeter, the Entrepreneurial State and China. A little quote from that. that paper. The central claim is that China's speed and ability to leapfrog its peer nations in the last 3 decades stems largely from the fact that it possesses a fully developed entrepreneurial state. From a theoretical point of view, China's achievements reaffirm all the elements contained in Schumpeter's vision of the successful state involvement in economic activity. The centrality of selective credit for innovation and development, the key role of the state in steering innovation and exercising leadership towards development, the strategic role of investment development banks to provide the necessary funding. China's development trajectory has them all. A Schumpeterian type of banking system, state-directed involvement in forging the transformation, a robust degree of socialization of investment. They conclude the Chinese state encapsulates all 3 dimensions and therefore should be taken as the prototype of a Schumpeterian entrepreneurial state. So what is being pushed in Scotland, in Norway, in Europe, in Italy and elsewhere is a view that China illustrates how it should be done. So forget freedom, forget all that sense of potential, of choice, of there being many opportunities. No, the opportunities will come to those people the state selects in a fascist type system as the recipients of that opportunity. If you're not in the club, then you need not even bother applying.
Okay, well, let's move on quickly because, of course, that's policy that is being pushed into one government in the UK. Are we seeing the effects of that? Perhaps we're seeing the effects of certain types of economic policy being implemented under the covers of COVID. And well, this is one headline from the BBC this morning: COVID lockdown, we're burning through about £500,000 a day. This is the gym franchise Pure Gym, £500,000 a day, and that's the average over 8 months of closure. Their chief executive told the BBC Today programme this morning, it's meant about £120 million of costs and no revenue coming in over 275 gyms. So we'll see what the lockdown announcement this afternoon does to that. But we don't need to worry because apparently the job situation is not going to be as bad as we thought. This is the CIPD who run this labour market outlook survey, and they've published their report. UK companies report strongest employment intentions since onset of COVID-19 pandemic, survey shows. And let's just have a look at what this says. The UK economy could be close to unemployment peak, probably similar to peak oil or something, I don't know. But anyway, close to unemployment peak according to a survey of 2,000 employers. Share of employers planning to recruit has risen to 56% in the first quarter. But there are caveats, and the caveats were downplayed in the mainstream press when I saw this, but the caveats are very clear in their report. They say, however, it is far too soon to rule out further significant private sector redundancies later in the year if the government does not extend the furlough scheme to the end of June, or if the economy suffers any additional unexpected shocks. It would be hugely counterproductive if the government's financial support faltered while some of the biggest sectors of the UK economy are still in survival mode. So apparently lots of employers, David, suggesting that they might be in a position to recruit in the coming weeks and months, but only if the furlough scheme continues. And I think that's a pretty key point. Without the government support, it's not going to keep standing.
Well, there's so many parts of the economy which are only standing on government handouts, and if the furlough scheme is ended, then there will be mass unemployment. So it's been masked. It's been masked by a policy which has decided to keep the real effects of the lockdown out of the headlines, and to mitigate them by building up vast amounts of government debt. That's the policy, and it will continue. I'm sure it will continue to June, and there'll be an announcement soon, and everyone will be happy until eventually the bill comes due, and then we won't be able to pay it.
Well, indeed, and as we mentioned on Friday, have you got any comments about the story we mentioned on Friday that global debt is now 360% of GDP in total?
It's the end. There's no way back from that. It cannot be repaid. It cannot be sustained. It's only going to be now more money printing. That's the only way. The only way that they've managed to borrow that in the first place is they're not really borrowing it. It's just been printed by central banks, and on it will go. Buy gold is my advice.
Okay, so on it will go. Now, let's move on. If you like what the UK Column does and you would like to support us, then please head over to ukcolumn.org/community, and there are options to help us out there. That'd be very much appreciated. But also, please share our material that you find anywhere on the various platforms. And I'd also like to highlight this article just gone up by Ian Davis last night. Is COVID-19 a hoax? Now, he's saying, does asking this question make someone a COVID denier? Does considering the possibility that COVID doesn't exist evidence a callous disregard for the lives allegedly lost to the disease? And so this is really a response to much of the criticism of anybody that is asking questions about coronavirus, about COVID-19 and so on. And it goes into quite a bit of detail on germ theory and the various alternative the various discussions around germ theory at the moment. It's well worth reading. It's quite detailed, but it is worth reading and worth sharing. So please do share that as well.
Excellent. Well, we jump from that over to Mark Anderson, who was able to join me from the depths of Texas yesterday. We had an interesting discussion. The full discussion will go up on the UK Column website, but I wanted just to put up a little clip as Mark talking about some very interesting and positive developments around constitutional sheriffs in the US. So have a listen to this clip, have a think about what he's saying and really what the parallels would be if a similar system was brought in UK. And then we'll show you some of the information he was talking about. You said that there were lots of interesting things to talk about, and one of the key things was a constitutional sheriffs conference. Now, I think you had written an article in American Free Press about that. Is that correct?
Well, I wrote one article that gets into some history of U.S. elections, and a corollary of that was to talk to Sheriff Richard Mack, the founder of the Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers Association, to ask him specifically about constitutional sheriffs and elections. And I asked him, could sheriffs intervene in some way, shape, or form if elections were suspected of being stolen in real time while the theft is apparently happening, or immediately after an election? And he said in the affirmative, while a judge's order might be necessary and maybe sheriffs couldn't act totally autonomously, nevertheless, the concept of a constitutional sheriff, which is more or less unique to American jurisprudence, under that concept, sheriffs could intervene and conceivably impound voting machines if there were enough complaints by voters that, hey, it looks like there's something very untoward going on, and sheriff, we need you to step in and question the election workers, question the election board. It looks like there's irregularities, it looks like there's glitches, it looks like there's criminal acts going on, a fraud, and that sheriffs could intervene in that. But there's a lot of other things that these sheriffs under a constitutional umbrella could do, having to do with COVID, having to do with illegal and fraudulent foreclosures on your home, which is a problem in the UK as well as the US and Canada and around the world. But the Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers Association that Mac founded is having an important conference, as you indicated, Brian, February 26 and 27, just north of Houston at a community called the Woodlands. And I'll be there with my videographer engineer, Ron Avery, who helps me co-produce my Republic Broadcasting radio show called Stop the Presses. And we're going to really flesh out what is the constitutional sheriff, what is the concept behind that, what does a constitutional sheriff believe and do, how do they operate, what is the philosophical and political basis they have, what powers do they have, and how can they help mitigate against this COVID hysteria, mitigate against election fraud, and mitigate against, among other things, fraudulent foreclosures on homes. Very important categories. Ron Avery and I are involved in is we're going to provide a live stream service as reporters under my Stop the Presses umbrella. We are going to live stream the entire event, mainly on Friday, February 26th, from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. U.S. Central Time, because people in the UK, in Europe, in Canada, Australia, the U.S., they need to see that the constitutional sheriff, that this concept is based on the fact that in the U.S. law enforcement, the county sheriff is the only elected law enforcement officer. City police chiefs operate for political bosses known as mayors. State police operate for political bosses known as governors. The sheriff, however, ideally can and should and is expected to answer to the voters first and foremost. So the constitutional sheriff puts the sheriff on a lawful basis in terms of common law, in terms of the Constitution.
So we ended it there, but the full clip, as I say, will go up on the UK Column website. This is a very important idea, I think, that's happening in Texas. They're getting back to looking at the sheriff system, and as he said, those county sheriffs are the only ones that are elected. Is this the difference between a police officer here in UK and a police constable and policing by consent? Why, of course, are people in Texas now looking at this? Because they know the scale of corruption in Texas, and with the recent disaster over the cold weather and the snows, Texas has been on its knees. Excuse me. So here's the American Free Press article that he's referring to. You can find that on AmericanFreePress.net. This is detail of that conference, the County Sheriff, America's Last Hope, which is Friday, February the 26th. And you can find that on the Mix and Stream, nstream.com. And amongst other topics that we discussed, of course, the results of vaccinations, and Mark was highlighting the Defender here with some of the stories, tragic death in this one, but also other cases, 501 deaths, 10,748 other injuries reported following vaccines, links between the vaccines and blood disorders, and that's, of course, certainly being reported here in UK in the yellow card scheme reports, which have now started to come out. And this one, he also mentioned OpenVIA's reports on the numbers of deaths and hospitalizations. So I think we can say no doubt that there are adverse reactions, but at the moment the US and the UK government simply refusing to investigate those statistics. Right, I'll just pop this one up. It was just sent through to us. Didn't have time to play that, or we do not have time to play the clip on the news, but just to show you what is on the internet if you go looking for it. An interviewer questioning the Pfizer CEO, you've not had your shot, when do you plan to get it? And the answer is a lot of hesitation. I've not yet had time. As soon as I can, I will. But I'm not really important and I don't want to jump the queue. So you can easily find this little clip with this interview, and you can watch the reaction of the chief executive as he squirms and shrugs his shoulder and smiles, because at the time the interview took place, he hadn't had a jab himself. And I've mentioned the statistics now coming out from the yellow card system in UK. The reading is very, very sobering. We'll just leave it there with a few images. David, any responses there? It is good to see things happening in Texas because the state has been devastated. They are now recovering from the cold weather, but as a functioning state of the US, it's clear that many people think it's time to move away from what they regard as a corrupt federal system.
Well, this is the word that keeps coming up, is corrupt. And if a society, if a government, if a state becomes so egregiously corrupt, so obviously corrupt, that it just can't be endured any longer, then people are going to find other ways of managing their affairs. And the fact that they're looking towards the law to do this is very encouraging, because that's exactly what they should be doing. They should be restoring to themselves the law and insisting that the state officials who are busy oppressing them have to follow that law too. I think we're going to see something similar starting to occur in Britain before very much longer.
Yes, and to have a look at the power of the parish councils even, and what proper police constables should be doing would be a key part of that. Let's have a quick look at what the BBC's been up to, and a big thank you for the viewer that pointed this one out to me. So this was a couple of days ago. Commercial TV channels unite to screen COVID vaccine myth-busting video. Well, one of the things that this article said was the film will not be shown on the BBC because the corporation's charter prevents it from taking part in campaigns, but the issues it raises and some of the participants will feature on BBC TV and radio programmes on Thursday. So I just interpreted that for our viewers and listeners today. What it really means is the BBC's charter prevents us taking part in the campaign, and that is why we are promoting the campaign in advance and taking part in the campaign. I don't think I could put it clearer than that, because if you look at this article about a campaign they can't promote, it's very long. We can scroll through it a bit here. It goes on, and of course this is the BBC not talking about this campaign, because if they did they would be helping to promote it, which they can't. Well, I took exception at this. I decided I'd speak to the BBC's press team. They said they would send me a line, and they did. This is the answer. Hi Brian, in answer to your question earlier, the BBC's position is set out in the press release about the film. While the BBC's charter prevents it from taking part in the campaign, the BBC is looking at the important issues raised by the campaign on the day it launches. So really we can say, to explain why they are taking part in the campaign contrary to their charter, the BBC told me they're looking at promoting the campaign.
Yeah.
And I thought I'd challenge them again, so I went back and I said the statement appears disingenuous, deliberately misleading to the public, in that having said the BBC charter prevents the BBC taking part in the campaigns, the BBC then publishes the article fully supporting and promoting the campaign and boasts that the BBC will be publishing more on the campaign, its promoters and their aims. I asked for an explanation from the BBC as to the reason for this contradictory statement and asked for you to provide the name and position of the BBC employee with overall responsibility for making the statement and producing the article itself. Well, the reply was a stunning silence, but I did happen to find from 2019 complaints from the public about what the BBC does. And I'll just highlight in this list of complaints, the key ones overwhelmingly are political bias, other bias, factual inaccuracy, and offence to public taste. But this is the organisation that says it's going to work flat out to help all our children. So I'm going to suggest to our audience, the last thing you need near your children is the BBC. The BBC runs on a budget of £5 billion now. This is the standard of their organisational diagram for adults. We're just going to ask very nicely if our viewers and listeners will help investigate the BBC to find out who the key people are. Most of them are on salaries of roughly £400,000 a year. But can we bring these people in front of the public gaze to ask them the questions and get answers?
Okay, let's move on to censorship. Now, we're going to start off with Theresa May back in January 2018, because she said that regulation of the internet will make the UK the best place to start and grow a digital business, but also the safest place to be online. So this is what Theresa May was promising in January 2018. Later on in 2018, then the Secretary of State for Digital Culture, Media and Sport was talking about how the British government might support the mainstream press, because they recognised that the mainstream press was in a bit of difficulty. So he said that the government was going to take action to tackle the challenges our media face today. not a decade ago. And so he launched the Cairncross Review. Dame Frances Cairncross will bring her experience in journalism and academia to tackle these issues with a view to examine the press and protect the future of high quality journalism. This is when we started hearing about this concept of trust. We only want to go to trustworthy sources for our information and so on. He went on to say, I tremble at the thought of a media regulated by the state in a time of malevolent forces in politics. So he doesn't want to see media regulation, any more media regulation, but he was quite happy to see internet regulation and the platforms being regulated. He said, if we get this wrong, I fear for the future of our liberal democracy. That's what Matt Hancock was saying. And indeed, that's exactly, I think that was a fair enough statement, because the so-called liberal democracy is now at major risk. But following on from that, then, the government published their online harms white paper, which was all about free speech being shut down. Now, it was being couched in various languages, a lot of child protection issues and so on. And in fact, if you look through the press over the last couple of weeks, child protection issues have been coming back to the fore, because we need regulation on the internet to protect children, despite the fact that doing harm to children is already illegal. And we don't actually need any new legislation to protect children in this regard. But Oliver, to really get to the heart of what the online harms white paper was about, Oliver Dowden, the new digital secretary, well, he told us it's all about defending the country from misinformation and digital interference. That's a top priority for this government. And we've got to keep in mind exactly the infrastructure that the government has built in order to do that. And we've shown this a number of times, but it's worth just remembering what we're looking at here. This is the network that the government has built. Obviously, GCHQs, MI5 and MI6 existed prior to coronavirus, prior to online harms, noise, but we then got the Joint Biosecurity Centre. And most of these organisations are now spying on the British public and watching very closely the narratives that are being pushed around by members of the British public. But the Cabinet Office is where the real action has happened, because in the meantime, they've built a rapid response unit, which is all about social media and analysis of social media narratives and countering social media narratives. With the National Security Communications Team, 77 Brigade has had a new remit, 13 Signals has had a new remit, the Department of Digital Culture, Media and Sport has got its own fake news unit, and we've also had the Freedom of Information Clearinghouse. But also, let's not forget, Hut 18, which is another British Army section, which is all about running the information war and countering so-called disinformation in the UK. We see continuing press headlines. So this is the latest on this. Cases of perverts accessing child pornography nearly double in 5 years. Therefore, we've got to regulate the internet. There are other ways to deal with this issue without bringing in new legislation, because there's plenty of legislation in place to deal with that already. We've got this article from the Red Box on Times from Adam Hadley. Online safety bill risks scapegoating platforms and won't create a safer internet. But of course, the basis of this article, once again, is this notion of disinformation and bad behaviour on the internet, horrendous racist abuse of black footballers, and continuing disinformation from anti-vaxxers is what he wants to deal with. So that's from 2018 up to date. And so far, the results of the online harms inquiry and so on haven't resulted in any actual legislation, but it has resulted in, first of all, Ofcom being appointed as the new online harms regulator. So Ofcom is going to be taking that role. That was announced in December. Dame Melanie Dawes, the chief executive, was saying, we're really pleased to take on this new role. Being online brings huge benefits, but 4 in 5 people have concerns about it. That shows the need for sensible, balanced rules that protect users from serious harm, but also recognise the great things about online, including free expression. So we're going to recognise the things about online, including the great things about being online, including free expression, by shutting down free expression. That seems to be fit very well with what Brian was just talking about with the BBC and their statements. But another piece of news is that, well, the government seems to be wanting to put Paul Dacre, the former editor of the Daily Mail, in charge of Ofcom. He will become their chairman. And so I think the timing of that is very interesting. I'll get David's thoughts on that in 1 second. But just to finish this off, the online harms white paper, there was a consultation, there were responses to that consultation. There will be legislation coming out in the next little while. As we got a hint from that Times article a couple of seconds ago, it will be called the Online Safety Bill. So it's all about being safe online, because we've got to be safe in everything we do. Lockdowns are about keeping us safe from COVID, and this new legislation will be all about keeping us safe online. But free speech, complete shutdown, well, in fact, it may not be that. It looks very much like they are going to pursue a narrative where free speech is protected by the Online Safety Bill, but freedom of reach, that will not be protected. So you'll be allowed to speak out, but nobody will be allowed to read what you say, or hear what you say, or see what you say, because it's freedom of reach, that you have no such right, David, and it's very, very likely that that's going to be the main focus of the forthcoming legislation.
I'm reading a book just now by a Polish author. It's entitled The Demon in Democracy. And it's looking at the similarities from someone who lived through communism, the fall of communism, and the transfer of his society over to a liberal democrat system. He's looking at the similarities between communism and liberal democracy. And one of the things that he sees is this need to control the narrative. There is no real pluralism of ideas, of thought. There is one narrative, and this is put out by every aspect of the state, and any counter view is suppressed ruthlessly. He saw the similarity. I'm seeing the similarity. If they're speaking the truth, why are they so afraid of people saying something else?
This is, yeah,
that's the key question.
It absolutely is. But of course, government legislation is only one way to have a chilling effect on freedom of speech on the internet. The cancel culture is another. David and Lawrence Fox making some comments which covered by the Mail here.
Yes, the Reclaim Party, he's founded a political party called the Reclaim Party. They put out a poll to see how many people find that they're reluctant to speak their minds. 49% said it's harder to share thoughts on controversial topics than it was 5 years ago. Just 12% of those surveyed, 1 in 8 disagreed. On immigration, 4 in 10 said they were too scared to share their real beliefs. 42% said they didn't want to openly discuss transgender rights. So they would have around half the people in Britain are too frightened to say what they really think, because they are frightened of the censure from either the state or from the other half of the people, or they're so afflicted by a fear that's been created. It may not be real, but it's certainly perceived as being real by the people who are being silenced.
I think that's a very wide problem, and it's something that many people have written to us about. Actually, they don't want to be on social media. They don't want to be speaking out on social media.
Because they're frightened.
Yes. Okay. Now, David, this morning on BBC Radio 4 and the Today programme, they did actually discuss something which you've been discussing on this programme for the last couple of weeks, which is the Internecine strife in the Scottish National Party. What's the latest?
Yes, it's made the BBC. It's even made the New York Times this week. A quick summary of where we're at. The Spectator here, Salmon Sturgeon, and why the Spectator went to court. The Spectator went to court to clarify what the court order, which was put in place to protect the identities of the women who brought complaints against Alex Salmond, actually meant, and whether it should be interpreted as it has been by the lawyers inside the Scottish Parliament, as silencing the press in their duty to investigate wrongdoing and to bring matters of public attention, of importance to the public attention, and indeed to silence the Parliament in their official investigation into these very events. So the Scottish courts confirmed that this was not their intention, and therefore the publication of the information put out by Alex Salmond and the appearance of Alex Salmond at the committee in Parliament to investigate the handling of the complaints is all back on again. This has been very bad news for some people, such as Leslie Evans. So here the Times Scotland is reporting the new salmon inquiry evidence piles pressure on under fire mandarins, and a very pensive looking Leslie Evans is sitting there. Times reports two of the most prominent figures in the Scottish Government and the line of fire after Alex Salmond produced fresh evidence before his appearance at a Holyrood inquiry on Wednesday this week. Salmond has provided two new statements referring to the ministerial code and policy developments last week. These submissions are understood to relate to documents not handed to the inquiry committee by either the government or the Crown Office despite repeated requests. They are likely to heap pressure on Leslie Evans, Permanent Secretary of the Civil Service, and James Wolfe, the Lord Advocate, the public prosecutor in Scotland. So more pressure on Leslie Evans, and of course the questions that Robert Greene asked of Leslie Evans are still unanswered, and we'll be pushing to see if we can get some comment from Leslie Evans or indeed her successor regarding that particular cover-up of the funding of Dame Elise Angelini's lawsuit against Robert. Now, Alex Salmond inquiry here, the Scotsman reporting, Nicola Sturgeon's facing new questions of when she knew of the complaints against the First Minister. One aspect of this is statements by Nicola Sturgeon, which seems to have misled Parliament. Obviously, there's much more to it than that, but that's an area where there's a lot of focus and a lot of pressure now mounting on Nicola, threatening her job, threatening her hold on her position as First Minister. The Herald here reports that the Conservatives are demanding that the buck stops with Nicola, not the various fall guys she's got lined up. So that is because, as the Times here reports, that Leslie Evans and others are facing the sack. Ministers have been discussing the need for an exit strategy for the 62-year-old who leads more than 5,000 civil servants and whose contract is due to expire in spring next year. One informed source said that the SNP MSPs in the committee are preparing to throw her under the bus. Another nationalist sources also expect departures from Nicola Sturgeon's team, including her husband, SNP Chief Executive Peter Murrow, and the Chief of Staff Liz Lloyd, who is leaking information to the press. The next item here is Alex Salmond, a Herald article from Ian McWhirter, which I think summarises where we're at quite well. Ian McWhirter writes, Holyrood hardly dares breathe as Salmond faces final showdown. He comments, like an ageing gunfighter waiting for the final showdown, Alex Salmond has been kicking his heels outside the old courthouse for weeks. Winds blow, doors squeak, clocks tick, and still no one came. All we heard was the muffled cries of black-coated lawyers arguing about how many angels could occupy the head of a pin until now. So that's, you see, you can tell that eventually the very sleepy Scottish mainstream press have finally woken up to this, and they're polishing off their best writing for this, and it's getting very entertaining indeed. Now, one other aspect of there are many aspects to the Civil Wars. We've covered, Brian and I, on a special on this. One aspect of it is the split runs now through the whole nationalist movement, including one of the main blog sites, which is called Wings Over Scotland, which is written from a location in England, and it looks at Scottish politics, and it's very popular amongst nationalist supporters and independent supporters, but it's also supporting Alex Salmond and is now beyond the pale. So here the Herald here reports SNP row over second Hell site blog post. Divisions within the SNP are growing after an MP penned an article for the website described hours earlier by a colleague as an appalling hate fest. And we have here the tweet from Mr. Wishart in question. He says, let's leave aside the fact that this rubbish is barely coherent. Imagine thinking it's still okay for an SNP politician to write for this appalling hate fest. It is shocking. So Wings Over Scotland is now an appalling hate fest. It was lauded and supported and praised to the skies not that many years ago by these same people, but now it's an appalling hate fest apparently. And Wings Over Scotland are reporting this. They report here on a definition of transphobia. We'll cover that one in extra time. And they also report that Fiona Robinson and Graham Campbell, supported by Nicola Sturgeon, argued that anyone found tweeting or even retweeting links to Wings Over Scotland should be expelled from the party. Although we don't know yet if this is anything has happened from this. And we have here Graham Campbell tweeting out, "I can't divulge what's said on the National Executive Committee. However, my own position accords with yours. Mike Martindale's Money's Wings Over Scotland is an alt-right fascistic platform. Supporting, retweeting or writing for it is incompatible with left, social democratic, civic, nationalist or socialist politics. I believe it should be made incompatible with SNP membership." So they are basically saying that Kenny McCaskill, the extremely socialist member of Parliament for the SNP, must be drummed out of the party because he has written for the wrong side in the great split between Sturgeon and Salmond. And it will go on. It's building up to a bit of a crescendo. Wednesday will be quite entertaining. More on this story later.
David, you've described utter chaos and breakdown there politically in Scotland. I'm going to suggest to our viewers and listeners that, of course, that situation has been deliberately created, but you've certainly described the Magic Kingdom. Let's have a look at why I'm using that phrase. Volunteer police cadets. Well, thank you very much to the former police professional who alerted us to this. The title is Protecting the Magic and Securing Tomorrow. On Wednesday, the 17th of February 2021, over 800 cadets from 32 police forces across England and Wales took part in a virtual engagement event with the Walt Disney Company Europe, Middle East and Africa EMEA security team. So if we just scroll through that a little bit, here it is, Securing Tomorrow. So we can rest assured that these young people are being trained by Walt Disney in order to secure our world tomorrow. And that, of course, is the Magic Kingdom. Quite a lot of material here, which I'll just give you. They talk about the experience of Disney security people because they've had to cover huge sporting events and they've got to look after Mickey Mouse in shopping malls and certainly high-profile guests at red carpet East European film premieres. So this is really difficult policing. This is equivalent to massive drug busts and going after the people abusing children. So we're going to get the Magic Kingdom to train young cadets. Lots of comments here from Disney and from the Volunteer Police Cadets organisation, which I'll come on to. But there we are at the bottom. All our dreams can come true if we have the courage to pursue them. So this is on a website supported by the police. Well, more than that, it's supported by citizens in policing and indeed the Cabinet Office. And David, don't feel left out because Police Scotland youth volunteers are also involved in this. Youth United, Police Now. So we've got the Cabinet Office, the heart of the British government, fully linked in to Disney. I'll just give you 30 seconds to respond on that before we break down the organisational structure a bit.
I'm delighted that Police Scotland's part of this because they've been for a long time very far from reality. And it's good to hear that they're now going full Disney. They might be slightly less threatening, I would hope.
Yep, the full Mickey Mouse, that's an appropriate way of describing it. So let's have a look at the structure. It all falls under the National Police Chiefs Council, this very dark organisation that needs a lot of spotlight put upon it. We've got the Citizens in Policing, valuing volunteers. This is creating something, Mike, is the feeling I get. Here's the Volunteer Police Cadets, and the Scottish equivalent is Police Scotland Youth Volunteers. And then we've got all of the partner agencies that we've shown And of course, we can now bring in the experience of the Walt Disney Company to help us learn how to police our company. So what do they say? Well, the purpose of the volunteer police cadets is not to recruit police officers of the future, but to encourage the spirit of adventure and good citizenship amongst its members. So you've been through the cadet system. If this was an army cadet, that young person would be expected to know quite a bit about the army. And when they went through the army training, you could expect a person who was already primed and would know how to do a lot of essential things. But this is all about the spirit of adventure. So presumably when Britain's police are beating people on the streets, this is them just learning the spirit of adventure and citizenship. We've got this one. We believe that every young person deserves the opportunity to thrive regardless of his or her background. I don't think they're should be using his or her in their mic. I think that was rather appalling. We encourage young people from all backgrounds to join the VPC, including those who may be vulnerable to the influences of crime and social exclusion. Remember that they want those who may be vulnerable to the influences of crime and social exclusion. So this is the aims, just to make sure we understand everything, to promote a practical understanding of policing amongst all young people, to encourage the spirit of adventure and good citizenship, to support local policing priorities through volunteering and give young people a chance to be heard, to inspire young people to participate positively in their communities. Seems to me, Mike, this is entering the utopia. In the future, everything will be fine. This man caught my eye because he's the man who is quoted from VPC in the body of the article. It's Tim Mann, and apparently he's the Adult Training Projects Partnership Lead. Good. And he says this is just the start of a really exciting partnership between the National VPC and the EMEA, that's Walt Disney, security team. And we've been planning this event since November 2020, and it was great to see how the cadets engaged with the security team at Disney. We had a small number of cadets make up a Q&A panel, and they were a credit to their forces. Well, this is another man from the VPC organisation, and I was fascinated to see that his job is apparently Youth Voice Marshal Volunteer Portal Lead. Now, I thought that this was possibly training marshals as well as training police cadets, but actually on another section of the site I found a reference to this. The leader resources is now in the resource library of MVP. If you require access to the Marshall VPC Cadet Management System, please contact your force coordinator. So I think the Marshall refers to a database where they seem to be recording everything to do with the youngsters and their education. I found that very interesting. So this is where they're going from the age of 8, mini police in schools. They're getting the children young, taking them right up through. But they're not teaching them about policing. They're teaching them how to excel at life and spirit of adventure. Then I came across this, keeping young people safe, with lots of adverts for NSPCC, confidential advice. And at the end of it, it says that if you have concern about safeguarding, you can actually talk to the VPC safeguarding team. I wondered whether the VPC safeguarding team had done any basic police work to investigate the many detailed reports of sex images appearing in Disney cartoons. And if anybody thinks that this is a bad joke by the UK column, I assure you it isn't. Go and have a look online for this evidence yourself, where embedded images are clearly present in Disney material. I'm getting an unpleasant feeling about what is going on here with this. This is latest news from them, of course, protecting the magic and securing tomorrow, and relax about policing because it's run by Walt Disney. David, when I see vulnerable young children encouraged to get alongside an organisation, and I see that is under the supposed protection of the National Police Chiefs Council, But I can look at Disney as an organisation and ask some very penetrating questions as to what they're actually putting in their cartoon material. There is something deeply concerning about this.
I get a very odd feeling about that. I don't get a good feeling about it at all. What exactly are the police doing with the children? I mean, what's the purpose of this? There's a few platitudes, but it doesn't really equate to a properly expressed program. If you look at something like the Scouts or the Girl Guides or something, you'll find a much more coherent view, certainly when they were formed, of what they were for. What's this for?
The thing that strikes me, David, just briefly, is the Scouts, the Girl Guides, and so on are getting a lot of woke influence coming into their programs and so on. It's not going in the right direction, in my opinion. But here we've got the police recruiting cadets, but the police is being politicized in a way that we aren't seeing in many of these other organizations. And when the police is politicized to the degree that it is, then exactly what is the nature of the training? Citizenship, but to a slightly different degree, perhaps. It has potential, I think, to be extremely damaging to to children's outlook in life. And it brings me back to the idea of getting the children young and making sure that they grow up with the right attitudes.
Yes, and what attitudes are they speaking? What are they teaching them? What do they actually believe? It's never really expressed with any kind of clarity.
No, but if you're training children that everybody is part of the state surveillance system, if that's your objective, of course all this starts to make sense. And since you've put a China theme into the news, that makes sense to me as well. What's going on here is grooming of the children, certainly political grooming, in order to make those children feel that state surveillance is a normal activity in a democracy. So I think a lot of questions need to be asked of this particular organisation, and I think we're prepared to ask the question about the Disney cartoons and see what they say. But of course we hope that other viewers and listeners from UK column audience who may share our concerns will also take appropriate action.
David, the final slide graphic of today then, I think you said that this sums up COVID in one, or at least the COVID policy in one image.
Yes, COVID, UK COVID policy in one photograph. So this is a park, and the council have sent some workmen down, and they've put a little triangulated arrangement of Gerrish fences around so that no one sits on the benches. Right, so you can walk in the park, but you can't sit on the benches, because the benches, there's more than 2 seats there, and this would be terrible. In fact, there's more than one. You can't interact. So it's the banality of it. It's the triviality of it. It's the sadness of it, and the waste of resources, and the sheer small-mindedness of the policy. It's just breathtaking.
It's breathtaking, but of course if you live in the Magic Kingdom, all of this makes complete sense, because we will be living a cartoon dictatorship is the reality of it. I think we're at the end.
We are. We'll be back in 10 minutes if you're on the UK column members site for some extra.
Yeah, thanks for joining us, and thank you to everybody supporting the UK column. And thank you for all the really interesting emails that we're getting and the information that our viewers and listeners are supplying. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.